I don't expect to be loved forever. In fact, I don't expect to be loved at all. And I think that's at the heart of this podcast, and the reason why I do it is to just expose other ways of being in the world, maybe abnormal, dysfunctional thought, distorted thinking. And then, as I even say that, calling something distorted thinking, it's not that there's no control to set it aside and call it distorted. But I think what distorted thinking to me is anything that threatens your life, let's say, like suicidal thoughts, that's distorted thinking. Self-hatred, that's distorted thinking. We normalize it, but it really is distorted. And I think some of a lot of it we can't help. And I think it's just part of our evolution as intellectual beings, where we're still very much in our infancy of living with these brains that do all sorts of wonderful, amazing things. We are not at our peak. I don't know what the peak looks like, but we are, it's funny, we're top of the food chain. We're dominant just because we're smarter. We've got more capacity in our brains. But it's totally goes against, every other animal on the planet fits into a food chain, and it's very much like, we are the only dominant animal that has, like, if we were put up against a lion, who's going to win that battle? Well, I mean, who would win that battle back before we had our intellectual revolution? The lion. But because we've grown and become these really smart beings, and I hate using the word smart, I just can't think of another word right now. Our intellect, as it has grown, has allowed us to create tools. We can create weapons. We can gather our social abilities. We can gather up other humans with the weapons and take down the wildebeest. That's. I guess I'm thinking like, okay, a pack of hyenas could like trap a larger animal and kill it. Yep, there are other examples, but it's like the runaway greenhouse effect. I mean, our intellect has rocketed us to the top and beyond, and we're tipping into the toxic realm, and there's many signs of that, obviously, but that's not really what I wanted to talk about. And it's funny that I go to that place instantly. But I started off with something that I don't like talking about. I don't like thinking about, and it's really not natural to me, and I'm going to admit that. And I hate admitting it because it makes me seem like I'm cold, and I'm not. People who know me know that I'm not cold. But it does explain lots of my behavior. And I have done decades of work of trying to figure out how to deal with it. And so back to my opening statement, I don't expect to be loved forever. And I don't have an expectation of love at all. And that's a dangerous place to be. And it plays out in my thoughts, and it plays out in certain behaviors. But I was taught at a young age that love was finite. And when I say love, I think, love is, again, it's a survival mechanism. When you love a baby, the parents love the baby and protect it with their lives. And that allows that infant to survive. And we have, as human beings, and they have proven that other animals have the capacity to love, whatever the hell that means. Again, I can't give you a definition. But I'm going to use our common definition, or at least my understanding of it. Because again, I've had to teach myself what this means. And I guess this admission to you over this podcast is for you to understand where I'm coming from and where others might be coming from that have had abnormal development. Let's say, make it real sterilized, abnormal development. So at a young age, I had, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, but my father developed Alzheimer's when I was 11. And age 11 is, you're right at that point, right before your tween year, right before you turn back into a very needy being. You know, you try to separate from your parents, but you're just grasping and trying to learn how to be yourself and how to be in the world. And it was at that moment that my father began forgetting. He became violent. He became angry. He lost his ability to do things that he loved to do, and that made him extremely angry at times. And I adapted to him. And I think in that point, you know, over time, living with Dad as he began to lose his abilities and lose his mind, essentially. You know, he lost his ability to do his stamp collection. He couldn't write anymore. He couldn't think of people's names. I remember going to church on Sundays, and both my mom and my dad were in the choir, and my grandmother. Sitting and watching him, looking side to side at the chorus beside him, the other people beside him, and then looking down at the music that he once was able to read, and he couldn't read it, and he was just humming along, and it was the saddest thing I can remember seeing. And that was happening when I was 12, 13. So watching this person suffer, watching this person just lose all control over his world, and understanding as much as a person that age can understand that person could no longer care for me, could no longer love me in a way that a parent might. And I began to shift how I lived with him, and eventually lost him entirely. And as I've talked about in the past, you know, over time, he forgot who I was completely. And that the age when he had forgotten me was age 16. And he was a disabled veteran. He had his leg amputated. Actually, well, he was badly injured in World War II, and then his leg was amputated, and so he had an artificial leg, and so he was being housed in a veteran's home. Thank goodness. I am so grateful to that place for caring for him, and in that his service in the Navy allowed him to carry out his life in that facility. And I don't know, you know, I was so young. I don't know, you know, if his level of care was appropriate, or, you know, if he was treated well. I have no idea. But I went to go visit him with my grandmother and a friend when I was 16. We walked into the room, and he was in a wheelchair, and his face immediately lit up when my grandmother walked in. And now, knowing how Alzheimer's works, she was the longest standing memory in his mind. And I was there, and I had a friend come with me for moral support. And he looked at her and, thought that he knew her. And my grandmother spoke to him and said, Sam, his name was Sam, Samuel Anthony. Sam, this is your daughter, Molly. And he just looked at me and had no recognition of who I was, no recall. The memory of me had been taken. And so in that moment, as a 16-year-old, I can't imagine the chemistry of my body in that moment. And I guess I'm talking about it because it, anyway, in that moment, how did I feel? I can't remember. And I think this is kind of where I'm trying to get at, where, that my feeling of love being finite. Because I witnessed it being taken from me. And it was unfair. And it was out of my control, out of anyone's control, out of his control. And so right there I learned that it's not up to us. It's not up to me, and it's not up to the people in our lives. It can be taken. And I just learned at an early age that it can be taken. And so, my distorted thinking that doesn't play out in my conscious life, it plays out in my subconscious life, is that it will be taken. So don't get attached. So I practice a certain level of detachment that I'm aware of. And to watch the people around me, respond to that, I feel awful. And I know that I'm not enough. I'm not enough for people. I'm not enough. I can't bring enough to the table when it comes to relationships. And so I stay on the outside. And I was thinking yesterday, as I was driving home from a very intense training that brought up a lot of personal stuff and a lot of, we're just digging into who we were and not what excites us, but what brings us joy and happiness and all that stuff. That I live in a really desolate place. And I'm used to it, though. It's not like I don't feel like I need anyone's sympathy or any therapy or, it's just the way I've been and the way it's the way I've survived. And so yesterday at this training, we were talking about, the buzzword was spark. And what spark is, and the person who was doing the training, he attached numbers to it. So if something brings you a lot of joy, and, you would attach a number to it, a 9. So one, it has to be 1 out of 10. So attach a 9 to it. And something else might be a 4, and it's not like one is better than the other. It's just, one brings you up higher than another. I don't know. It's hard to explain. He explained us. It took an entire day for him to explain it to us. So I'm certainly not going to explain it right now in 30 seconds. But all this talk about spark in the granular level